And welcome to Cypress Creek Christian Church and Community Center. I'm Norma Lowry, and I have the honor and pleasure of serving as the Executive Director of the Community Center. We are so glad that you're here. This is going to be a really exciting evening. But before we kick it off, we have a video we want you to watch about the national parks.
They are a treasure house of nature's superlatives. 84 million acres of the most stunning landscapes anyone has ever seen. Including a mountain so massive it creates its own weather, whose peak rises more than 20,000 feet above sea level, the highest point on the continent. A valley where a river disappears into burning sands 282 feet below sea level. The lowest, driest, and hottest location in the country. A labyrinth of caves longer than any other ever measured. And the deepest lake in the nation with the clearest water in the world. They contain trees dead for 225 million years that are now solid rock. And trees still growing that were already saplings before the time of Christ, before Rome conquered the known world, before the Greeks worshipped in the Parthenon, before the Egyptians built the pyramids. Trees that are the oldest living things on Earth. And the tallest, and the largest. They encompass a mile-deep gash in the ground, where the Hopis say the first people emerged from the underworld, and where scientists say a river has patiently carved its way to expose rocks that are 1.7 billion years old, nearly half the age of the planet itself. And an island where a goddess named Pele destroys everything in her path, while she simultaneously gives birth to new land. They preserve cathedrals of stone, gaily ornamented by cascading ribbons of water. Arctic dreamscapes where the rivers are made of ice. And a geological wonderland with rivers that steam, mud that boils, amidst the greatest collection of geysers in the world. They became the last refuge for magnificent species of animals that otherwise would have vanished forever. And they remain a refuge for human beings seeking to replenish their spirit, geographies of memory and hope where countless American families have forged an intimate connection to their land and then passed it along to their children.
I think that deep in our DNA is this embedded memory of when we were not separated from the rest of the natural world, that we were part of it. The Bible talks about the Garden of Eden as that experience that we had at the beginnings of our dimmest memories as a species. And so when we enter a park, we're entering a place that has been, at least the attempt has been made to keep it like it once was. And we cross that boundary and suddenly we're no longer masters of the natural world, we're part of it. And in that sense, it's like we're going home. It doesn't matter where we're from. We've come back to a place that is where we came from.
It is the preservation of the scenery, of the forests, and the wilderness game for the people as a whole, instead of leaving the enjoyment thereof to be confined to the very rich. It is noteworthy in its essential democracy, one of the best bits of national achievement which our people have to their credit. And our people should see to it that they are preserved for their children and their children's children forever, with their majestic beauty all unmarred. Theodore Roosevelt.
But they are more than a collection of rocks and trees and inspirational scenes from nature. They embody something less tangible, yet equally enduring, an idea born in the United States nearly a century after its creation, as uniquely American as the Declaration of Independence and just as radical.
What could be more democratic than owning together the most magnificent places on your continent? Think about Europe. In Europe, the most magnificent places, the palaces, the parks, are owned by aristocrats, by monarchs, by the wealthy. In America, magnificence is a common treasure. That's the essence of our democracy.
National parks, the writer and historian Wallace Stegner once said, are the best idea we've ever had.
It's not the best idea. The best idea came from Thomas Jefferson, that all human beings, irrespective of the accident of their birth, are entitled to enjoy the aspirations of being fully complete and free human beings. That's America's gift to the world. But right up there are the national parks. Jefferson, I think, would say, if you go out into the heart of America and see this continent in its glory, it will embolden you to dream about the possibilities of life. That American nature is the guarantor of American constitutional freedom. That if you don't have a genuine link to nature in a serious, even profound way, you can't be an American.
Like the idea of America itself, full of competing demands and impulses, the national park idea has been constantly debated, constantly tested, and is constantly evolving, ultimately embracing places that also preserve the nation's first principles, its highest aspirations, its greatest sacrifices, even reminders of its most shameful mistakes. Most of all, the story of the national parks is the story of people. People from every conceivable background, rich and poor, famous and unknown, soldiers and scientists, natives and newcomers, idealists, artists, and entrepreneurs. people who were willing to devote themselves to saving some precious portion of the land they loved, and in doing so, reminded their fellow citizens of the full meaning of democracy. From the very beginning, as they struggled over who should control their national parks, what should be allowed within their boundaries, even why they should exist at all, Americans have looked upon these wonders of nature and seen in them the reflection of their own dreams.
One of the things I think we witness when we go to the parks is the immensity and the intimacy of time. On the one hand, we experience the immensity of time, which is the creation itself. It is the universe unfolding before us. And yet it is also time shared with the people that we visit these places with. And so it's the experience that we remember when our parents took us for the first time to these, and then we as parents passing them on to our children. A kind of intimate transmission from generation to generation to generation of the love of place, the love of nation, that the national parks are meant to stand for.
Are we ready for the interview, please? Please.
For me, it was what kind of brought it all together. As a photographer, I wanted to go out as a visual artist and do something at the 100-year anniversary. And I knew quickly it had to be in black and white for me. Becker, President Bush's chief of staff, and I had dinner in Houston, and she asked if I had any ideas, and I had been reading at that time the Ken Burns, Dayton Duncan series, the National Parks, America's Best Idea. So I was kind of watching that, and I started doing some research and knew that the 100-year anniversary was 2016, and at that time this was about 6 years down the road. It just kind of struck me, being a photographer, that I could go out and in black and white, which is my medium that I love to work in, photograph these parks at the 100-year anniversary, and black and white being, for me, that timeless bridge back to the past century, so that when you look at the photographs, even though they're done in 2013, 2014, 2015, the land hasn't changed. It still looks like the photographs you look at from the early 1900s, late 1800s. And the National Park Service has indeed protected these spots as they intended. To my understanding, from what I've been told, it's the only collection now of all 59 national parks photographed by one photographer in black and white that exists.
Our Making Connections series that is brought to you by the Community Center continues tonight as we celebrate the centennial of our national parks. We have Kyle Britt, Mark Burns and Shara Fry, who will talk to us a little bit about Mark's project that has taken place over the past 5 years. And then we have the awesome opportunity of exploring those national parks through the eyes and camera lens of Mark's as we move across the street to enjoy the exhibit at the museum. There's refreshments, of course, and the museum will stay open till 10 o'clock. A couple of notes about things that are included in your program. We have a list of the national parks we thought you might like to see. Circle those that you've been to, check those that you want to put on your bucket list. And then on the other side of that flyer is an announcement about our Making Connections next event, which will be on August 23rd. We are having Hastings Stewart, who is the Vice President of Public Relations, Public Affairs, for the Super Bowl host committee. He's going to talk to us, tell us what the inside scoop on what all it takes to make the big game happen. And let's see, I think that's one other thing, please. Silence your cell phones. And I think we're ready, Sharon.
It is so great to see all of you here this evening because you're going to have a real treat when you're able to see the images that Mark has captured in his odyssey, for lack of a better word. Now, Kyle Britt is a national parks enthusiast. He has been going to national parks, I guess, your entire life.
31 years.
He's been to you've been to every one.
Been to every one.
He's been to every one. When I first learned of Mark's project, just tried to figure out a way I could get him to let me carry his camera bags. I really wanted to go, but I didn't get to. So for me, it's all vicarious, and I've purchased quite a few of his prints. And we'll tell you about an opportunity that you could do that too as we get towards the end of the program. But we're celebrating the power of the visual image. This is a unique exhibit that you have here at the museum because Mark, I think, insisted upon this, of interchanging it with landscape oils by great artists. And this is really the beginning of it for you in many ways, wasn't it, Mark?
That's right. It was in the film we just saw with Ken Burns from the National Parks America's Best Idea was a beautiful film, a little intro that we add here. But in the book that they did, Ken Burns and Dayton Duncan, in the beginning of the book, they talked about the fact that it was arguably the work of the early painters and photographers out west that led to a lot of the lands becoming national parks. And that was really profound for me to read that and say, you know, wow, just like I said, I'm a photographer and I want to go out at the 100-year anniversary and photograph the parks in black and white, which is the medium that I love to work in. And black and white also became that timeless bridge back to the past century, I think, and it worked out well. But it was really the early artists, probably even more so than the early photographers, whose work that I really admired and looked at and loved. So that is where it began.
Well, they will see Thomas Moran, and Mark is a great fan of Thomas Moran because of the work that he did in Yellowstone. He went with a surveying group to help bring back sketches of what existed in Yellowstone. And in many ways, you could say he was sort of a photographer in the fact that he was a quick sketch artist in bringing back these images.
Right, with sketching, that was a great way to, much easier at that time than photography was. There were certainly photographers on a lot of those expeditions that were there with the artist at the same time, but photography at that time period was wet plate collodion, be the process that you were using, which started about 1851 through about 1890 or so, was called wet plate collodion, and you literally had to carry your darkroom with you to do that. So those photographers had portable darkroom tents, you know, the ones that were really on long expeditions, or some of them had even wagons that were, they were a darkroom wagon that they could go into, because that process, you had to take a glass plate, take that into a dark area, pour what they called collodion onto it, which is a mixture of cotton fiber and ether, which would create a base that you then put it into a silver nitrate bath, which would sensitize it, and you're all in the darkroom tent while you're doing this. then take that plate and put it into a film holder that went to the back of the camera in the darkroom tent. Once it's in the holder, you go outside the tent, you can put it on the back of the camera, you take the picture. It's called wet plate because literally it's dripping chemical down off the back of the camera at that point, and then it has to go back into the tin and be processed within 10 minutes before it dries. So the whole thing is done as the glass plate is wet. If it's a clear piece of glass that you had coated, then you would get a negative image. If it's a piece of glass that has a black, is painted black on the back, or it's a piece of tin, like a tin type would be, then you would get an actual positive image onto it. So that was the wet plate process. That was really what they were doing in the Civil War, would be the process Matthew Brady used, and you see a lot of pictures of him with the wagon that the horses would pull. So it was very complicated, where an artist like Thomas Moran in a sketchbook could go in and do a large number of sketches in pencil pretty quickly compared to that. So,
Two directions I want to go here. First, we're looking at a lot of photographs, and they're all in color. And of course, the oils that you're going to be seeing in the museum, they're in color as well. What is so special, and why for you did you do black and white? You said you did it for you.
I said what?
You said you did it for you.
Yeah,
I did it
know,
for me. And we became the recipients of it all.
Well, it's a process, again, that I love to do. I think black and white allows a photographer to express a mood and a feeling, to me, easier. I mean, that's going to change with different photographers, obviously. You see the world in color, and it's, when you look at color photographs, to me, they look normal, or they look like what you're used to seeing, and it's harder, I think, sometimes to put impact and feeling into that. And with black and white, if you're skilled at it, I can look at a scene, and I like to say I see in black and white a lot when I look at a color scene, because I'm looking at a landscape and I'm thinking, okay, if I put a green filter on, it's going to do this. A red filter, it's going to turn the sky black, and that's going to happen. If I put a blue filter, this is going to happen. Different things. So it's kind of going through a process in my mind of what I can do to that scene photographically in black and white to make it have the impact of what I'm feeling at the moment. And that's really what I'm trying to do, is create a photograph that kind of gives the viewer, when they come into like the gallery next door, a feeling of what it felt like to be there. So for example, there's a picture of Double Arch in the exhibit that when you look at it, you're like awestruck by this huge, massive Double Arch rock feature in Arches National Park, and it's very impressive. And you take a color photo of it sometime, and you get back and you look at it, and it's like, there it is, but it doesn't go, wow, it's really big and bold and just kind of hits you in the face. And when you do it in black and white, like the way I ended up photographing that particular feature was with a dark red filter that turns the sky almost completely black. So you get this real stark kind of graphic, element to it, and it just kind of has a punch and a power. So that's what you're trying to do. And black and white, to me, allows me to do that through using different filters and different things to really create tones that have strength and power and punch to them.
Well, the point is art. You're not doing postcards here.
That's true also.
Or trying not to do postcards,
right.
I guess, for the most part, unless they're art postcards. We're celebrating the centennial of the National Parks Foundation, and it could be easily argued that were it not for the early painters, the early photographers, we might not have had the national park system that we have.
That's correct, and that's really what I read that led me to start this project. That I didn't know that before I read that book, or I didn't realize it, I guess, and it just was very profound to read that it was Easterners, politicians and people back east that were viewing photographs and paintings, mainly paintings at that time, of Yosemite Valley with 3,000-foot granite cliffs and 1,000-foot waterfalls and Old Faithful and geysers in Yellowstone that were, what is this place with geysers and these thermals and all this weird geologic activity happening in the Grand Canyon and Grand Teton National Park. And so these were lands that people back east hadn't seen in person, but they were able to look at these majestic paintings and say, we have to protect this place. And that's really what, again, what the work that those painters did, and me thinking, I want to go out at the 100-year anniversary and photograph the parks in black and white to create this set of 59 photographs in black and white as a timeless bridge for me back to the past century. So for me, it looks like everybody probably has heard of Ansel Adams, who's did his work in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, but probably most of his bigger photographs were done or better known in the 30s and 40s. And so he's relatively contemporary, really, but when you look at these, they're going to be dated 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, yet they're in black and white, so they look very, very similar to what some of those photographs would have looked like from that time period.
Landscape hasn't changed a whole lot.
Well, hopefully not. That's what they're.
I mean, that's part of the point, isn't it?
That's the point, yeah.
The treasure of the national parks. We're talking the Centennial here, but actually the history of the parks and certainly the appreciation for them with a few individuals started even earlier than that. President Lincoln?
Yeah. The history of the parks was really, a lot of things really came together at the same time. That's really what I was going to say that I think is an interesting parallel here. Photography as a process or an art form was really invented in the 1830s in France, and in 1839 the first photographic commercial process by Louis Daguerre was created, which was daguerreotypes. In 1851 the wet plate collodion process started. That's also a period where Western expansion was happening across America, and expeditions were going west, and the painters like Thomas Moran, Albert Bierstadt first, some of those were going out with their sketchbooks, but as photography and the wet plate process developed, they were, those people were on those expeditions also taking these photographs. And it really parallels, I think, how that all, the fact that you could record the visual image with something like a photograph at that time as Western expansion was happening, coinciding with the American civilization moving west, I think was very interesting. So it was kind of being documented as it happened. But Abraham Lincoln in 1864 was the first president to protect a piece of United States land for the public to enjoy, which was the Yosemite Grant. Yosemite became a national park in 1890, I believe. Yellowstone became the world's first national park in 1872. Ulysses S. Grant created that as the world's first national park.
So it wasn't all Teddy Roosevelt?
No, it was not all Teddy Roosevelt. He had his own...
kind of enthusiasm.
Yeah, huge enthusiasm. He was president, I think, 1901 to 1910. He created what's called the Antiquities Act, and that was a huge vehicle. Kyle knows a lot about this also. The Antiquities Act allowed a president to designate an area as a national monument and protect it with his pen, basically as an executive order, without having to go through Congress to create a national park, which was a much longer process. So Teddy Roosevelt came along and, bang, 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 the Grand Canyon's a national monument, Mesa Verde's a national monument, all these lands became protected, which was great, and then they later became national parks. The Grand Canyon, I believe, in 1919. So the Antiquities Act and Teddy Roosevelt played a big role. But it was, again, to me, everything was kind of happening at the same time, with photography developing as an art form. These artists from the Hudson River School that had gone west, Thomas Moran, Thomas Hill, Albert Bierstadt.
And they both were British. Thomas Moran, Thomas Hill, both British. They both ended up born in the early 1800s. They died in the early 1900s. They both lived to be fairly old. Both died in California. And I thought, and they were part of the Hudson School, or loosely associated with that style of painting. And
Right.
yet it took two guys who were born in England to come to America and to have this fantastic experience and decide they're going to live and die ultimately on the West Coast. That was amazing to me.
And Albert Bierstadt was German, I believe, painter. But yeah, they really created the visual image of the American West, and those paintings and those early photographs, viewed by the politicians and the businessmen and the people in the position of power back east, or that said we had to protect these lands. So that's really how it all started.
American birthright. I mean, maybe we don't always accept it as that, but there was something that inspired you, Kyle, to just grab onto this for 31 years and to go to every national park. That's quite a journey yourself.
Well, first, before I say anything about me, I want to thank all of y'all for coming out tonight. I'm always a big supporter of anything that has to do with the national parks. And the people, Norma, who introduced us, and the people from the Pearl Fincher, I think have been fantastic in supporting Mark in this endeavor and all the work he's done. And Mark and I have known each other for a number of years, and we were lucky enough to spend, well, about eight parks or so. We spent time together during the course of the time he was photographing them. My personal journey started very young. My parents, I was a Boy Scout, I was an Eagle Scout. I spent time outdoors in a mountain climbing camp which is basically inside of Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado. And then I had the epiphany, though, when I took my wife to the south rim of the Grand Canyon in 1984. And she had such a fabulous experience, and we saw several hundred tourists from around the world there. And I was both impressed when we went to the Rangers presentation that evening at sunset. And there were 400 people there, and probably 24 of them were from the United States, but everybody from all over the world. And so I started contemplating the idea of how we have this wonderful national resource that, in my mind, wasn't being fully developed. So I started becoming, I guess, the Johnny Appleseed of running loose on the streets, proselytizing about the national park system. And pretty soon I looked up and there were people. Literally today, I was walking around an office and about 6 people came up and said, "Hey, there's Mr. National Park." So, you could turn the lights out in here and I'd still be talking about it. So, but it's a wonderful experience, and I've had some great times. And of course, part of it is being with Mark on his adventure.
And Mark's photography evokes something in you every time you see them.
Absolutely. I look at them. We just look at them hanging there, and they're beautifully hung and well lit. And I can say nice things about this because it's his deal. He can't compliment his own photography and the work here, but I certainly think it's impressive.
It is. Now, Mark, you didn't just, I'm going to go out to Yosemite today, and I'm going to snap a few little shots. That's not how you go about it.
No, it was a lot of planning. I did photography. It was 4.5 years probably out of the 5-year project, and I drove 160,000 miles roughly. He
drove to all these parks.
Yeah, it was.
And that old beat-up Toyota of his.
Yeah, Toyota FJ Cruiser did a great job. I've got a roof rack on top of it that was also a shooting platform that I could climb up on, and that allows you to get kind of up over the initial layer of brush that you would have in front of you, which really opens up the landscape that you're photographing and makes a big difference. Because if you can imagine, if you just pull off on the side of the road and you've got bushes or a fence line in front of you, that really distracts from what you can photograph beyond it. And if you get up even just another to the top of that FJ Cruiser and you're standing up there with a tripod, you really just can see much more distance without that brush right in front of you. So that helped a lot. And a lot of the photographs were done that way from the top of that vehicle. But it was a lot of planning. Most of the trips were 3 to 4 weeks long, and they would be regional trips. I would go from Houston to, through Albuquerque to Tucson to Saguaro National Park, for example, maybe to up to Grand Canyon, then up into Utah to Zion, Bryce Canyon, Capitol Reef maybe, and then swing back over to Rocky Mountain National Park near Denver, and then back down through New Mexico back into Texas. That would be, one small little trip actually for me, because the big trips were all the way through the Southwest, all the way up through California, then up through Oregon to Crater Lake and to the Seattle area to North Cascades, right on the Canadian border, Olympic National Park, Mount Rainier, then over to Glacier National Park, and then back down from Glacier, through Rocky Mountain National Park, or sometimes into South Dakota to the parks there, Badlands. and back in. So they were, some of these trips I would pull out of my driveway and come back 4 weeks later and have 11,000 miles, additional miles on my vehicle in 4 weeks. So it's a lot of driving. And it got to be probably the last 15 months or so where I was, looking at the map going, this is going to be a long drive, because I had done it for 3 or 4 years before that. But yeah, a lot of planning and a lot of weather planning, obviously.
I would say weather is important, and of course it's a visual art, and so that means it's always about the light.
Yeah. But once I would get to an area, I think this is really important to say, once I would get to an area, I was never, set to a schedule per se. The weather and nature really dictated my schedule where I was. So I may be in the Grand Canyon and I would be looking at a map or looking at radar or watching the weather, and I could see that there's going to be some storms moving into southwestern Utah or southeastern Utah, and I'd say it may be a 4 or 5 hour drive, but I'm going to hop in the car and drive up there, and I'll be there for dawn tomorrow morning, and that to get something there, because really the best weather for me was when you had a storm really kind of clearing up was the best. When they're coming in, it can be a good time, but the very best situation normally is when you get there and it's kind of rainy and cloudy, and right as it starts to break up and starts to clear up, then you start to have patches of light that open up, and the sun is constantly changing because the clouds are dissipating, and you have these little feathering edges of light. And a lot of people, I think, don't realize that a lot of the photographs you see over there, not all of them, but a lot of them are really captured moments of literally just maybe 60 seconds when the light looked like that. And then, so that's what I'm looking for, these little feathered edges when the sun is behind the clouds, but I'm looking at the clouds and they're moving across, and you're thinking right when it gets to that edge and it's still filtered and diffused a little bit, where you have a little bit of a directional shadow, but it's not just direct hard sunlight. So that was really the best, situation. So that's what I was chasing all the time was weather like that, trying to find that.
Up in the middle of the night in order to be in the location where you thought you needed to be.
Yeah, I drove a lot during the dark. Yeah.
It's a lonely existence.
It was a lot of, it was fun though. I great kind of pinch yourself project now when I'm done and I look back at it and I think about it, and it's fun to see like films like we saw here, or look at TV shows or films about national parks, having been to every one of them now. I mean, you see a TV show and they're in a park. Oh yeah, I remember that place, and it doesn't matter where they go, you've been there and you remember it. So it's kind of funny to have photographed all of them and spent a lot of time driving around looking at all of them pretty carefully.
What about the ones that got away?
The ones where?
The ones that got away. The shots that got away.
Yeah,
There's always going to be that.
Yeah, there were some shots that got away. On that note, a friend of mine, a good friend of mine, who Brent Jett, he's a NASA. He was with NASA, retired last January, but he was a 4-time space shuttle commander, and I really love talking to him about the space program and stuff. But he went to one of the early programs that we had, and I was talking about weather and stuff, and he said, "Well, you're not going to get all of them perfect, And I kind of took that as a challenge that, well, I am going to get all of them perfect. I mean, this is what I'm trying to do. And he said, "Mark, you're not, And that always was kind of in the back of my head that I got to go back. I got to keep trying. I want to make this better. And so, but in the end, he was right. There's about 8 parks that, 8 or 10 that I know could have been, I think, more powerful photographs if I had more time to go back to them, to wait for the weather to be right. But some of them, I was in 4, 5, 6 times, and you just ran out of time. You can't do it.
You didn't have enough time. 31 years for Kyle. What are your, people always ask, what's your favorite? But the ones that you would repeat, Kyle.
Well, if I had a big enough pocketbook, I might go back to all of them. I need to tell 2 funny stories about Mark. We went to Kenai Fjords in Alaska. We were staying in my cousin's second home out on the peninsula. We went out and scouted, and Mark was, just course, burning holes in the landscape with his thoughts about how to see everything. And he came in and he said, we kind of calculated before we went to bed, and he said, yeah, I think we can sleep in tomorrow. Why don't we get up at 4 o'clock in the morning? Which was his idea of sleeping in before he goes out on the trail. And the other one was actually on that same trip. We went out to see a glacier that you could only get to by boat, and it is 4-hour trip. And right as we got to the glacier's edge, and he was talking about the thing, we had to shoot in a driving sleet rainstorm, or he had to shoot. My hands were freezing from holding his camera lenses and trying to protect him from getting water on them. And that was it. I mean, we didn't have a choice. The boat was going to go out that day, and we had to come back. And you shot and you shot and you shot, and I think you got did one make the cut?
We did find one that made the cut, and that was a funny photograph because the next day we were in Anchorage, and we went to the Anchorage Museum of Fine Arts, I believe, and they had a watercolor that an artist had done in like 1890 of that same glacier that looks almost exactly like the photograph that I took the day before. I looked at it, and I thought, when I saw it on the wall, I thought, what is that doing there? I mean, that's what I just took yesterday, and the composition was almost identical to what I captured the day before with the camera. So
besides the weather, I mean, national parks are not a still life. You've got wildlife.
Yeah.
And you had your experiences there too.
Well, yeah, I did. People ask about bears all the time, and there were plenty of bears in Alaska, but I think the biggest problem I had was moose. Grand Teton and Rocky Mountain National Park. I had some experience. Denali National Park. I had a huge bull moose in Denali National Park that came out from the willows right behind me. They always kind of would just pop out right behind me, and all of a sudden there's a 7-foot tall, 1,500-pound moose with these huge antlers thrashing around.
I wasn't with him on that one.
Yeah, I was at the Oxbow of the Snake River in Grand Teton one morning. My goal was to always get to the spot that I wanted to start at 1 hour before sunrise. So that's when he's talking about early. I normally was leaving motels about between 3 and 3:15 or so in the morning, and driving into the spot. Most of the motels I stayed at were maybe 25 miles or so outside the park because they were much less expensive and much more available, and because I was changing the schedule all the time, it allowed me to kind of be flexible. So I was driving in from that sort of a motel situation and leaving about 3 to 3:15, 3:30 maybe, and getting there. So I'm set up at this Oxbow of the Snake River, and right as the sky is starting to just barely lighten enough to where you could start to see depth a little bit, this big crashing, sound is occurring, and right in front of me, right where the front row is, this cow moose and her little baby pop out, and she stops and just immediately, squares up with me and looks at me, and her ears go back, and then she starts stomping one of her feet, and I'm thinking, this is not good. Yeah, I mean, the thought in my mind at that moment was I'm about to feel the hair on that moose's chest in my hands in a second because she's coming this way. And so I just kind of stood there. I've got a camera on a tripod in front of me and nothing else, and then slowly kind of looked down and just tried to be invisible and stepped backwards maybe 2 or 3 feet, and she stood there for maybe 30 seconds and snorted and stomped her feet a few times, and then turned and went down and swam across the Oxbow of the Snake River back onto a little island, and they were gone. So that was over with. But there were multiple things like that. The bear situation was really not ever a problem. We were around a number of bears, also within 15 yards or so, Alaskan brown bears that are 700-800 pounds, and they were very intimidating, but they were very kind of minded their own business, and looked at you, and you looked at them and minded your own business. So.
Well, we were both in Katmai National Park, which is the largest concentration of bears in the world, and we were there at different times. But our story and experiences are very similar. We're very very glad that we were there during the time when all the salmon were running, because the bears were eating 15,000 calories, and they weren't paying too much attention to us, which is the way we liked it. So his story about moose is I have a story. I don't like water moccasins, and I was spending a little time with a water moccasin in Congaree National Park down in South Carolina, and that was not what I really wanted to have happen to me. We parted ways, but that's the kind of thing that everybody's worried about, the large quadrupeds. But my one experience, I had one walk along I was with a group that we were spending seven days out on a trapper. We were repeating what a trapper run used to be like there to collect furs, and we were camped out on an isthmus between two islands, and along should come a huge 600-700 pound brown bear, and it certainly got my attention about 100 yards away, and there were 8 of us, and when we only had about 25 yards or so, 25 feet or so on this isthmus. And when it got close to us, we all just kind of gave it a little space, backed up about 4 or 5 feet, and the bear noticed us. But thank God it just kept going right down the line and kept on going to the next island, it was basically looking for anything that had, was on any dead fish on the shoreline.
There's your moose.
That's the Denali moose up there, by the way, that came out of the willows right behind me. That I think that's an iPhone pic actually of it. He was walking. I had a rent-a-car on that trip in that park, and he was going around the front of the car while I was going around the back of the car, just trying to
ring around. But you developed a really good fondness, I guess, would be the word, for buffalo.
Oh yes, I did. I was very, very happy when recently the current administration named the American bison as the official mammal of America, I guess, because I spent a lot of time out in the West, and I spent a lot of time around buffalo and bison, which I really came to admire. There was one morning that I was driving down. Again, it was one of those. I was coming back in from doing some dawn photography, maybe 7:30 in the morning or so. There's a long road that goes from Moran Junction, I think, and right outside of Grand Teton National Park, back into Jackson, Wyoming, and there's there's no other cars on the road, and there's this one bison I'm watching, and he's maybe half a mile in front of me, and he's walking, coming across the road, and I'm going straight down the road, and in front of me now, maybe 200 yards, he goes across the road, and he gets to the other side as I'm coming up, and I start kind of slowing down because there's nobody out there but me and this bison, and right on the other side is this split rail wood fence, which they are pretty common out there around the Grand Tetons, and they're about this high off the ground, I guess, the center rail, and they're kind of a little A-frame looking design to them, and I said to myself as I'm coming up, and he's now coming right over here, I said to myself, what are you going to do now? Because he's just standing there looking right at this fence, just perfectly perpendicular to it. And there's this huge, this no fences beyond there. It's the Grand Teton National Park. Well, right as I say that, he just kind of goes back and jumps right over it. Just doesn't even touch it. And I remember thinking,
How many people have seen a buffalo jump a fence?
He just went back and went right over it, didn't even touch it. And he just goes walking across the land, and it just blew me away that I thought, you are one great animal, But anyway, back to what we were talking about with bison, but I also did I read about them a lot and did a lot of studying, and in the early 1700s, there was an estimated 60 million bison across the American Great Plains, 60 million estimated, and by 1900 there were less than 1,000. And that just, was startling to me that 60 million bison can be reduced to less than 1,000 in that period of time. And it was because of the railroads and because of, weapons that were able to kill them and things.
The wholesale slaughter.
Yeah.
But also, the railroads acted almost as a cattle guard, and a lot of the migration of the buffalo, the bison,
right.
That led to their loss.
Right. But they just were a great animal. I'm glad that we are able to rebuild them now and rebuild the herds. And that's one thing very special when you're in Yellowstone National Park, if you get to go there. the herds in Yellowstone, they are direct descendants of those original American bison herds that were, that dwindled down to around 1,000 or so at the turn of the century. So,
The national parks, I guess the best thing that any of us as a layman could do would just be go see them, appreciate them. Don't you think? What is the inspiration for you?
Absolutely.
well, I think there's so much inspiration. The parks, I obviously spent a lot of time there waiting. I mean, we're talking about the photography I did. A lot of the photography was just sitting, waiting on the sun to do something different, or waiting on the weather formation to come in, or waiting on, the whatever it may be to happen. I spent a lot of time just, with the camera sitting in front of me on a tripod, because I'm very composition based. I think I'm very composition based because of those early painters whose work I like so much, and a painter has the artistic liberty of painting great compositions. You can go look at a scene, and it may be, I was in Zion National Park, for example, and there's this beautiful scene that I just loved, and the Virgin Rivers, makes a perfect curve in front of me, and this Watchman rock formation's up there, and the trees are great, but right in the middle is this dead tree that's hanging over the water, and if I was a painter, I would paint that scene, but that dead tree wouldn't be there, So you would have this beautiful pastoral setting with this mountain and this river, and that's what they're able to do. And I think that really, looking at a lot of those early paintings, made me a very, structured with composition. So I was always looking for really tight composition in all my photographs. And so once I would find that, I would just wait, for the light to change, the weather to change, whatever was going to happen or what I thought would happen. And so a lot of times in the parks, I may be there for 4 or 5 days and only take, 30 or 40 photographs in the end, because it's really waiting. I know that's the shot that I want, so it's waiting for the atmosphere to do what I want it to.
Much like Monet, to paint the water lily over and over and over again, different times of day, different times of year.
Right, it looks very different at different times of the day.
Or the haystacks of Van Gogh. I mean, it's not so very different.
That's right. It changes. It's always changing.
All right. We're running out of time. I think maybe some of you might have some questions. I do want to mention that there is going to be a print event at the museum on July 7th. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you'll have an opportunity, some of you, if you'll come back, you have the opportunity to purchase some of Mark's prints. I personally, Kyle does too, I've run out of wall space, and I finally decided, because I could go and I could snap as many photos as I wanted to on my iPhone or even a real camera, but it doesn't evoke the same thing, and it's just wonderful to be able to have that piece of a project that's so incredible. Because were it not for, let's hope that Mark Burns' name gets entered into the annals of the art world, of the people who have helped preserve our greatest memories and our greatest treasure.
Do we have the Sally Jewell photo on the computer anywhere? You can pull up. Now that you mentioned that, I just would like to say it was quite an honor for me to get invited to the Department of the Interior to meet with Sally Jewell, our current Secretary of the Interior. She's a wonderful, wonderful secretary, and she has one of my photographs in her office now in the Department of the Interior of the Topeka Glacier from Glacier Bay in Alaska. That's her next to the photograph. She had just done a trip to Alaska and was talking about the diminishing glaciers. And when I was in Glacier Bay, it was really astounding for me to get there, having read a lot about them, and the Muir Glacier and other big glaciers that are there. And they're not there anymore. They're just the moraine field of gravel left from where they used to be. There's only about 3 tidewater glaciers, I think, that actually still come into the water at Glacier Bay. So that's Topeka Glacier. That's hanging in the gallery, I think, next door. But anyway, I was honored to get to spend 45 minutes with her in her office talking, and then for her to have one of the photographs there. So.
Well, this collection opened at the Bush 41 Library in College Station originally. You're seeing 59 photographs here, 59?
No,
28.
there's
28?
30 plus the 3 additional.
30 plus 3 additional that were not part of that original exhibit there. Those of us who are on the advisory board of Mark's project have great dreams that maybe it will ultimately end up in the collection of the Smithsonian. So we're hoping that that is something that will happen. And you can help by getting the word out. We're going to try to get a piece of paper or something over for you over there in the museum if you'd like to get like an e-invitation to the print event on July 7th. If you'll just leave an email, we'll make sure that you get that and tell your friends and your coworkers, and it helps spread the word, because I would like to see myself, and I know that Kyle would too.
I own some
Mark
of the,
can't do this for himself. He's
Yeah.
done the work. We've
Yeah.
got to do this for him now.
I own several of the prints. In fact, I think I own 7. But the other thing is that Mark's going to contribute part of the sales to the museum, which I think is great for the support of the museum. And you know, we're very big supporters of Mark, obviously, and of course the people like this museum that's nice enough to exhibit this work and say nice things about the national park system. So,
Does anybody have a question that maybe you would like to direct to Mark? Yeah, go ahead and just holler it out, if you will.
From the final 59, how many did I shoot? Well, again, in a lot of the parks, there were only maybe 30, 40, photographs that were taken total in some cases, and I would normally narrow that down to a lot of the parks. I have maybe 2 to 3, that I thought were really good, and some of those became limited edition prints where I may have 2 or 3 limited edition prints from one park, but in the end I could only pick one final photograph when you're going to have the, limit it to 1 from each park.
So if you go to Yellowstone, it's got to be Old Faithful.
Well, that's what we have, and that's what we, I kind of found. I mean, sometimes you find that those great iconic images are those great iconic images that people like to see, and sometimes, this is interesting. I'm glad you asked that. People sometimes would say, oh, this particular picture of Yosemite looks like the one Ansel Adams did in 1930, and I'm not trying to copy Ansel Adams, but I would go, yes, and his looks like the photograph that Carlton Watkins did in 1878, and Carlton Watkins' photograph looks exactly like the Albert Bierstadt painting in 1862. So, I mean, it's once you say that's a beautiful, beautiful view in Yosemite, artists are going to come, document it, and so that's where those iconic spots are kind of those iconic spots. So in the end, to answer your question, yes, Yellowstone is Old Faithful, because it actually looks amazingly like this poster that they did, and Kathy here can tell you was one of the most difficult photographs that I did, I think, because those geysers in the winter air or the spring air, when it's cold outside, you've got this hot steam vapor coming up, and it's literally just a steam vapor that's going everywhere. It looks just like a cloud that, if there's any breeze at all, the whole picture just looks like a white to gray cloud.
Looks like Houston on a foggy morning.
So
Yeah.
that was a really good example of one of the photographs that I thought in my mind ahead of time was going to be really easy, because the thing goes off every 90 minutes or something. They got a little, clock in the visitor center, next eruption, at whatever time. Okay, I'm going to, get there in the morning, right the first eruption after sunrise, and get this done. Well, I think I went back there probably 6 or 7 mornings, leaving this cabin at 3 a.m. every morning, driving 65 miles to get to Old Faithful to get set up for the first eruption around dawn. And it was on the last day that I was there that I got the photograph, because every other one...
Or he'd be there still.
Yeah, every other one it just didn't work out. So there was a lot of that, a lot of patience, and a lot of going back, and a lot of waiting, and a lot of, I think, personal discipline to myself, saying, no, I'm going to go back again, or I know we can get this and get it better. And driving sometime, 200 or 300 miles, going, no, I want to go back to that park. It may be, a 6-7 hour drive, but it's going to be worth it, if I try it again. And in a lot of cases it was, because the later photographs sometime were better.
There was another question over here.
Yes.
I've been to 21 of the parks that you have shown
Great.
as a photographer, and I had the same question that she had about the color part of it. When we talk about the Red Rock Country and the Four Corners, I wonder if you would show a better rendition in color when you talk about the Red Rock Country parks. Your black and white rendition has been absolutely great. So that was my one question.
Basically, he was wondering, you know, it's great, but do you not show the parks better if you show them in color? Maybe that wasn't really your philosophy on this because you are an artist.
Yeah.
And your medium is black and white.
Right. Well, I think there's some amazingly beautiful photographs in color of the national parks, and I look at them sometimes envious and I sometimes think, and I'm asked, you know, to present some of mine sometimes in color. And actually, I just got back.
I have one. I have one of his color ones. It's beautiful.
Well, I just got back a few days ago from 4 days ago from a visit to 5 national parks in Arizona and Utah, which I photographed them with my 8x10 Deerdorf in color. So I do that sometimes, and I like to do that, and I want to do more of that. But for this project, at the 100-year anniversary, it was the medium I love to work in, and it also was that great bridge back to the past century, I think, to do it in black and white.
It was a continuum, in a sense, of the early days and the early days of photography, and then Mark continuing, showing it in more contemporary light, and yet it's still very much the same.
Right.
Shara, I have a question for the audience. Is there anybody here that's been to all 59 U.S. national parks? Is there anybody?
Well, you're going to get a chance to at least get to 28 of them tonight.
How about 58? How about 58? Oh, there's one right there, 58. Yeah.
No, has anybody been to half the national parks? Good. Okay, I figured we get. That's a pretty big accomplishment. So.
Well, I will tell you this, from having gone to the exhibits and watched people and some of these print events as well, it's really amazing to me as a former TV reporter and covering so many of art galleries and art events. This is the one that seems to engage people the most. You'll see people standing in front of these photographs, and they're pointing, and they're gesturing, and they're talking to their kids, or they're talking to their wife, and they're all reliving some memory from their childhood, or maybe it was just something that they saw in a documentary or something on film. But this is the most interactive art exhibit that I have ever just stood back and loved to watch the reactions of the people as they see the photographs, because everyone has, it touches you personally. I can't really put it into words. I think that the Ken Burns folks did maybe a better job of that, but there's something maybe that is inherent in our DNA that is that tie to nature and this incredible pride that we should have as Americans for this country that we don't get to see all the time. So, Mark, from the get-go, when you said that you were going to do this project, I knew that it was going to be magnificent, and you have certainly met that bar.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. You know, we've got the Grand Canyon poster here, which reminds me of something I was going to just mention if I had the opportunity to. I just was there last week, and one of the special things about this whole project, I love the Grand Canyon as a bunch of the parks. It's not about me, it's about the parks and about awareness of the parks and protecting the parks. We're at the 100-year anniversary now, which is great. We celebrate what we've done for 100 years, but it's also a time to look forward to the next 100 years, where we go now with management of the parks in the next 100 years. But when I'm at the Grand Canyon, I'm sitting on the South Rim or North Rim or in the canyon, wherever I am. The most amazing feeling that I have is that a feeling totally insignificant to anything, because that's 60 million years of creation right there that happened. I was on the South Rim one day with my camera walking along the rim, and a father and her daughter, about 9 or 10 years old, were standing there, and the father, as I walked by, was saying, "See what the river did to create this." And I thought to myself, it's what the river's doing, not what it did. But when you look at something like that, you think that yes, it did that, but it's still doing it, because you don't the geological time scale, the GTS they call it, is something that you can't comprehend when you're a human being, really, of what 60 million years of creation is. But so one of my most favorite feelings from this project was feeling totally insignificant, while I was doing it, that I'm totally insignificant in the big scheme of things here. That's something of beauty, and that's made me want to, have the discipline to go back to get a better picture, or a better picture to do it justice. So
We have one more question over here.
So this is to Mr. National Parks. One of the things that has concerned me recently is this discussion about having parts of the park sponsored, where you would see big signs and that type of thing. Who is it? Should we be writing to the Department of the Interior? Who should we be writing to? And how much of the Parks Foundation is supporting the parks? Do we need to be supporting the National Parks Foundation more? What is your opinion on that?
Although the National Park Foundation is the official charity of America's National Park Service, I think, yes, I would contact the Department of the Interior with your opinion on that. I heard about that and was immediately tweeting that, as I just said about the geological time scale, I said this is the biggest insult to the geological time scale you can have, to call that rock the Exxon rock, or whatever. But that's what they were talking about doing, was bringing corporate sponsorships into the national parks to sponsor an arch or a whatever. And it's just, again, my one thing that I changed, a way that I changed from this project, was in appreciating that feeling of total insignificance in the world. And so a corporate sponsorship is just, what does that mean, But I would say the Department of the Interior, probably.
Yeah, I've had this conversation with several people about this, and if you're talking about putting advertising on buses and stuff that take people in and out of the park, and you might have a building where it was dedicated to such and such company that wants to do this. I'm not so opposed to that. Where I really pretty much draw the line is when we walk up to, let's say, the Statue of Liberty, and you see sponsored by Victoria's Secret, or we walk up to something like Old
Mount
Faithful.
Rushmore.
Well, Old Faithful sponsored by Viagra. That would be something I would not be in favor of. Okay, so there's a rough little thing. The problem with the park system is they're underfunded, and they need, depending upon who you talk to, somewhere more than $5 billion, is somewhere between $5 billion and $11 billion. And in the scheme of the United States, that's not a lot, but in the budgeting process for the national park system, that's a huge amount of money. And just like most of the infrastructure around the United States, we need to address those issues. And one of them is sponsorship.
Well, Chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee is a Houstonian, so don't forget the purse strings, too. Can we do just one more?
Yeah,
because
sure.
she's been trying to get a question in.
Yes, thank you. I, too, am trying to visit all 59 national parks. I'm about halfway there. My biggest concern are the ones that you can't get to via road. You have to fly.
Right.
Could you talk a little bit more about those and how you get there, what you do once you get there? Are there places to stay? Is there a place to land, et cetera?
Yeah, I got to all of them, and there's some of them are more problematic, obviously, than others. Isle Royal and up in Lake Superior is about 65 miles out in the middle of Lake Superior. So I went to the Upper Michigan Peninsula and got on a boat in Copper Bay, and the boat, is a 4-hour boat ride out to the National Park Service dock there, and you get off the boat and you can camp on the island if you want to. That's one of them that was. You had to kind of want to get there to get there. Alaska has 8 parks, and I think you can drive to 3 of them, maybe. Kenai Fjords, you can drive to Exit Glacier, but you can't. You have to get in the boat to get to some of the better glaciers. Yeah. But we flew to on a commercial airline to Kotzebue,
well,
and then
there are 8 parks in Alaska, and that the reason this took me so long is that I had a very I'm glad my wife is still my wife after doing all this stuff I've done. Some of them she went on me, But you know, you would have to recharge the wallet occasionally when you were doing this adventure. And you know, Mark and I teamed up and went and spent some money to get into the least visited national park in the national park system, which is Kobik Valley. And Kobik Valley is basically you and 300,000 caribou. And it's up in the northwest corner of Alaska. And we paid a pilot to fly us in there. And, you know, it's not cheap.
But it's a beautiful, beautiful experience. You know, the gates of the Arctic, also above the Arctic Circle, Kobuk Valley. I remember, I'll never forget, you know, talking about your favorite parks. I love Yosemite, Grand Canyon, Grand Teton, Yellowstone, some of those big western parks. But Alaska is really life-changing in the way the wilderness is there, the pure wilderness that, you know, I left there thinking wilderness is important to have just for the sake of being wilderness. You know, whether people ever get here or not, it needs to be there. Like Kyle said, the thousands and thousands of caribou you fly over. You know, we're in a bush plane that holds 3 or 4 people. And a lot of them either were float planes that would land on the water in the little lakes or ponds and then go up to the shore and you would get out, or they were the Alaska bush wheel planes that have about a 36-inch tire, you know, big soft rubber tire that would land on the gravel bars. So yeah, I mean, you can get there. You know, you would fly from Anchorage to Kotzebue on Alaska Airlines, then you get on the bush plane and they would take you in. Now, we had to wait maybe a week in Kotzebue on our motel room for the weather to allow us to take off, and the pilot literally calls you on the phone and says, I need you at the plane in 20 minutes. You know, we're going to go because I got a break in the weather, and that's kind of how it happened up there. But yeah, and landing on a gravel bar in Gates of the Arctic at the headwaters of the Ambler River, which is the photograph. Well, the photograph was taken from elevation in here, but when we landed on one of the gravel bars there, the most, you know, unbelievably beautiful ice blue color of water that I've ever seen in my life. I'll never forget it. It just was amazing, you know, just the color. You've never seen it anywhere here. It was not turquoise blue. It was not emerald blue. It was just this ice blue pure color that was just coming through the mountains, and you know, you're literally at that point, we were a couple 100 miles into the wilderness, and when the pilot turns off the engine, you know, it's all you hear is the water from that river about this deep going by, and just, you know, the sound of the wind. So very special when you do get to those parks that are out there.
Yeah. In Alaska, I remember I went on a tour with a group called Arctic Wild, and I was asking a guy why they didn't have GPS maps up there, and he said, well, we're not really sure if any you know, European person has ever been up there. Literally, if you want to go up there and spend 3 weeks and claim a mountain, you could probably come back and make an argument that it's Mount Kyle Britt, because people just haven't. There are places that people haven't charted in extreme parts of Alaska. I mean, they've got it on satellites, but they don't have it where somebody's gone on the ground and graphed it out. Now, you know, I think we need to maybe wrap this up. If anybody wants to ask me questions when we go across,
Mark will be over there as well, and
be happy to answer them.
But we need to let everyone go see these photographs now. Mark, again, it's such a pleasure, it's such a joy to be able to even spend time with you, because he's got a lot of stories to tell. So enjoy the photographs, and be sure to tell your friends and come back when he does the print event later next month.
Thank you all.
Before you do leave, I want to say thank you, Kyle, Mark, Shara. An incredible story. We're just so thankful that you were here. And thank you all for coming. A couple of guys, 3 guys up in the balcony that you haven't seen. Larry Lipton has been filming. Brent has been our AV guy, and our sound guru, Corey. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it very much. One thing I want to ask, if you would like to be on our mailing list for our next Making Connections series, the little blue card is there in your program, and we have baskets out in the narthex as you leave to go to the museum to see the pictures. Have a great evening, and we'll see you across the street.